Life is hard, and I am tired. Don't get me wrong, I'm very lucky that I get to write videos like these and follow my passion of reminding you not to trust Craig Mazin, but that doesn't change the fact that existence is exhausting. The constant 24/7 grind, cooking, cleaning, dressing yourself again. The unavoidable emotional toll of a steadily growing capitalist empire built on demolishing the utopian future we were all promised as children and still haven't fully let go of. It's times like these I wish that I could be whisked away by a villainous man-beast, forced to live in his magically lavish mansion, and made to wear a stunning ball gown. Who wrote that? Was it Cass? I know it wasn't Chris. Okay, but who doesn't? You know what I'm talking about. You've seen it in movies. It's a classic Beauty and the Beast scenario. Sure, it starts with a girl getting kidnapped, and that technically sucks, but she's ultimately underestimated, pushes back, gains control of the situation, and then ends up better off for it through her own inner strength and perseverance, often fixing the problems she used to have in the process. And most importantly, she gets a fantastic dress. A dream dress. Dresses that become iconic cosplays synonymous with the character. We're talking Sarah's dress from the dream sequence in Labyrinth, or Katniss's Girl on Fire dress from the Hunger Games. Despite being forced on them by their literal captors, these outfits become symbols of who these women are, and we all want them. Like, it's not even my style, but I fully believe I could kick ass in a custom tailored evening gown just from the sheer confidence of how great I looked. And that's kind of the whole point. Cause sure, some creep may have forced you into it to claim ownership over you and put you in your place, but then you prove how little power any of these feminine frills actually have over you by either impressing or murdering the hell out of that guy while rocking it. That's called feminism. Okay, well that's not even addressed, first of all. But it does, unfortunately, kind of fit the pattern I'm referencing. I've seen this series of events happen my whole life in a wide variety of stories across genres and mediums. You can probably even think of a few examples right off the top of your head. A female protagonist gets captured by a villain and is forced into some kind of very feminine, objectifying clothing, but then she takes advantage of being underestimated, fights back, and escapes. This is inherently built on some pretty well-known misogynist tropes. The women are used by the frequently male writers as objects for the villain to abuse and the hero to rescue. Nothing about being kidnapped or belittled for an audience's entertainment should in any way be inspiring, and the dress itself only really makes sense as a symbol of that dehumanization. Until you kill him in it. We're still working on getting new sponsors for these videos so that we can keep paying our team, so I have nothing this time around, but if you've been enjoying these and have lots of extra dollars just laying around, consider signing up on patreon.com/doormonster. We recently released a new episode of History Flunkies, a podcast where I ask my wife about pretty basic history facts and we find out how disappointing the American education system really is. She's hilarious, and if you want to see more of the two of us, we also do a semi-daily live stream over on twitch.tv/doormonstertv, and we have a Discord community. All those links are in the description. The damsel in distress trope is nothing new, but this particular iteration, specifically where the woman is made to dress up and be pretty for her captor, is a relatively recent development, and regularly coincides with her assisting in her own rescue or escaping all on her own. There's something strangely empowering coming out of what would otherwise be a demeaning character beat, and despite how common it is, I've not been able to find a named trope that fully encompasses this phenomenon, so we're making one up. First, let's take a look at how women have historically been depicted in narrative storytelling. Going back to ancient times, gender norms developed in tandem with economic modes of production. As tools for farming, construction, and warfare became more advanced, women were increasingly restricted to either menial labor or childcare, with administrative roles being dominated by wealthy men. While there are countless exceptions to this pattern all over the world, this was how it played out in most of Europe and Mesopotamia, leading to a conflation of the masculine with reason, agency, and project, while the feminine stood in for nature, passivity, and the mystical, something mysterious that needed to be conquered and cultivated. And this very much reflected real life. Doctors and scientists of the time made up something called the wandering womb theory, where the independent, separate mind of a woman's uterus could lead to a syndrome called hysteria, that they could of course spread to each other if left untamed. To avoid outbreaks of a bunch of women complaining about something, Athens even established a government body specifically to regulate their behavior and clothing. Man, the past was bad. Even marriage was more about restraint and control than any kind of partnership. Falling in love and spending time with your wife was very uncool and could ruin your reputation. This attitude was very much reflected in the myth of women. They weren't so much considered characters with their own desires and motivations, more of an obstacle or test for the male heroes. In early Western writing, women are often portrayed as seductresses, and the male protagonist has to resist falling for her feminine wiles as a test of strength. Sometimes they heroically succeed, like Perseus avoiding being turned to stone and metaphorically grounding himself in his own identity by looking at Medusa in a mirror. Other times they fail and become a shameful joke because they fell in love with a prostitute or something. But chivalry wasn't dead, it just hadn't been born yet. In later centuries, after the fall of Rome, romantic love between spouses became more and more socially acceptable. Where marriage had once been nothing more than an alliance between families, it became more normalized for children to consent first, an idea invented by the Catholic Church in the 15th century. Hold on. Yeah, that's more real than it should be. As this somehow brand new idea quickly caught on, there was an explosion of new plays, poems, songs, and literature across Europe, leading to a new kind of adventure story, the chivalric romance, and with it, the damsel in distress. Tales of heroic knights had already existed, but the emphasis on courtly love and going on quests to save highborn women who were captured by dragons or rogue princes grew to be a fan favorite. Audiences of all ages and gender wanted to hear tales of Lancelot heroically rescuing Guinevere. As these stories were written down and preserved, the theme became permanently grafted into our Western literary playbook, and at this point it's considered like the most basic stock story you could possibly think of. But we're still missing the final, most important element of this trope, the part where the villain puts his victim into a pretty dress. That wouldn't start happening until stripping women of their own agency was largely considered a villainous act, which was a response to them gaining that agency in the first place, and is unfortunately a very recent development. The first wave of Western feminism started around the 1850s, with women in the US and Great Britain pushing for better inclusion in political and economic life, and a significant requirement for that was a change in clothing. Victorian fashion was very restrictive and uncomfortable, making it nearly impossible to work, speak publicly, travel alone, or do any of the things an independent person might want to do. Fashion choices started changing to meet the new demand, and in turn, women were able to assert their independence, make their own living, and be more selective of their partners. Not coincidentally, clothing starts to become a major theme in the writing of female characters. Meanwhile, the damsel in distress trope didn't go away, it just migrated to different genres where it was more acceptable. It was very common in alternative gothic novels like Dracula, where female victims were heavily sexualized to play up their vulnerability. Female characters gradually obtained more agency over the 1900s, even when they were kidnapped, because of course that never stopped happening. They started to play a more active role in their escape, all the way up through the adventure movies of the late 20th century. This is where we finally find the introduction of that dress-up aspect that this trope embodies. I don't know for sure who actually did it first, but the most influential early appearance I can think of is Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark. This one stands out because she's specifically mask presenting by choosing to dress the same way as Indiana Jones. She's a traveling archaeologist, just like he is, but when she's captured, she's forced into a thin, white, lacy dress for the rest of the movie.
I would very much like to see you in
a better one.
This specifically starts happening in American cinema around the time women start wearing traditionally masculine clothing and entering male spaces in real life, which again was very late. Women in Congress weren't even legally allowed to wear pants to work until the mid-1990s. So where did this new element come from? Why is this the form in which the damsel in distress trope survived after we made so much progress in diversifying and empowering female characters? I have theories. Artists have a knack for finding sneaky ways of expressing their deepest desires through their work, even when they've become social taboos, like during the early modern witch hunts when people created some very obscene sketches and wood carvings depicting all the terrible sexy things Satan and his minions might trick you into doing if you didn't know what to watch out for, as a warning to the public. Can't blame them. The devil did it. It's a character decision. They just really understand how to get into the mind of a sexual deviant, you know? You have to separate the art from the artist.
The fungus loves too.
Point is, they wanted to draw porn, so they found a way to do it while still remaining within the realm of social acceptability. This is applicable to our trope because, as has been made very clear, there are still plenty of men who would love it if gender roles could be rolled back to something resembling the bygone eras when women were conquerable. But they can't just make a movie about men getting to capture women, dress them up however they want, and parade them around as a status symbol, or they will very rightfully be chastised and outcast by the real people they're representing. So what's a misogynist to do? Thankfully, you can still have a character who does all of those things, you just have to make them the villain. Just as pornography was only acceptable in the 1500s as a warning against witch covens, depictions of women's clothing being manipulated and controlled by a man are only acceptable when they come from an established antagonist, much like the original damsel in distress trope itself. Villains are a time-honored way to explore all kinds of cultural taboo, whether they're being preserved or newly explored. For example, openly gay protagonists are still new enough that Disney regularly claims to have introduced the first one ever, but gay and queer-coded villains have been around for decades. In the same way that homosexuality was tested and normalized, outdated misogynist attitudes let out their dying breaths through the mouths of bad guys. Now, not every occurrence of this trope is from somebody hiding a repressed desire to subjugate women. There are a lot of default stories story beats we tend to include in our writing simply because we've seen it over and over again, and we take it for granted. Some people specifically address and deconstruct this trope, using it to more effectively establish how their characters fall outside that expectation, like in Shrek. But I do think that using the trope thoughtlessly perpetuates the desires of the people who invented it in the first place, and some people, Neil, happily use the audience's numbness as cover to indulge in it themselves, just like the guys who drew the cautionary Satan porn. Princess Leia's metal bikini is a textbook example of this usage. In her first movie, she's a classic empowered damsel. She's captured, sure, but she's strong, she resists torture, she bosses people around, and she takes her escape into her own hands the second someone unlocks the door. Even though she steadily changes into a more passive love interest, she's still very much an equal to the men, and by Return of the Jedi, she's infiltrating and threatening to blow up Jabba's palace to rescue Han Solo while disguised as a male bounty hunter. That is, until she's captured, chained to Jabba's throne, and forced to wear extremely revealing clothing. But it's not like George Lucas wrote that into the story and told Carrie Fisher to lay in extremely uncomfortable positions to avoid any unsightly body creases, just because he wanted to sexualize his own character, or see how naked he could get his lead actress to be on set. Jabba the Hutt did that, because he's the bad guy.
I got one outfit for the first movie, and as George taught me, there is no underwear in space. Instead of that, there is gaffer tape.
His explanation was that in space, bras don't exist, claiming zero gravity would make them unnecessary.
Gross. Hell of a choice for your self-insert, George. I think it's a little more honest than you intended. And there's the real twist. This kind of guy exists. This is a realistically villainous thing for a character to do, and it's a very familiar type of man to most women. Ironically, the existence of this trope and show business in general provide a perfect opportunity for these villains' real-life counterparts to exercise their power over women and strip them of their independence and agency all the time. You can write a villain like this without joining in. This is all over The Handmaid's Tale, where we are specifically following the women's perspective without further objectifying them, and it's a very different tone. It comes down to the small details like costumes and shot composition, and you can usually tell when the filmmakers are enjoying what the villain is doing compared to when they're not. In something like Star Wars, the villain is proudly showing off the woman he's remodeled as if he's tamed and fixed her, and that perspective is the one being shared with us. She's put on display for the male protagonists who still get to observe her blamelessly because they aren't the ones who put her in that situation, and for the audience who get to shamelessly enjoy the spectacle while mentally blaming it on the big slug. Carrie Fisher has said numerous times that she was very uncomfortable while doing this scene, and she thought George was joking when he first showed her the outfit. The same point could have been made without the shots they chose to get, or even without putting her in a metal bikini, but it exists for the same reason as the witch porn or that test scene, because that's what they wanted to make. So why do I still remember it being kinda cool? Right, because she's awesome. Remember when I said people tend to include common story beats without fully thinking about why, just because they've happened before? Well, one we discussed earlier that got introduced during the feminist movement of the 1900s is the woman escaping by herself. And when combined with this additional element of trying to control her physical appearance, that victory becomes even stronger. Because in spite of the villain and writer trying to convince themselves that they're in charge, she's still destined to win. And that's why, even though this trope is born from male insecurities about the growing agency of women, or perhaps because of it, I still daydream of fighting my way out of captivity and kicking ass in a sparkly dress that I never would have chosen to wear in the first place. Who wrote that? Over the years, this trope has developed towards being a female-driven fantasy, and yet it hasn't lost its misogynist elements. And I think that has to be because misogyny is still the thing we want to see vanquished. It's a response to the perpetual insistence on sexualizing women in real life. The more capable, independent, or mask-presenting a woman is, the more it seems like there's always some guy who wants to feminize her and put her in her place. It's not just that they want to see her looking feminine, they specifically want to stop her from looking like herself. Professional, practical, intelligent, things that are in their minds like a man. There's a reminder of independence and equality about women's physical appearance that makes these fictionally villainous men angry. That's why the women this happens to are always the ones who have strayed from the acceptable norm. Even Jasmine, who wears feminine clothing already, is just a little too feminist, and she wears blue, so Jafar puts her in red and traps her in a glass case like she's a trophy. But trying to control a woman by putting her in a dress, that's like putting Bane in the dark. Making Bruce Banner angry, destroying Thor's weapons. She's more than familiar with the limitations placed on her by being a woman. She's already subverted, rejected, or fought her way out of them to even be in the position she's in. So this type of story becomes a reminder of the strength she innately possesses and how little of an impact the petty humiliations of the villain actually have. It's a story about returning to square one to show how far you've come. The clothing is the visual symbol of the oppressive femininity that gets reclaimed. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Elizabeth Swann's entire story is represented through her clothing. The movie starts with her being literally suffocated by her corset during an awkward proposal. She's later kidnapped from her bedroom in her nightgown and uses the opportunity to demand an audience with the pirates attacking her town, and then threatens their most valuable possession. After being captured, she's given the prettiest dress a bunch of undead pirates could possibly have and forced to wear it to dinner with the captain, another recurring element of this trope, and she takes the opportunity to stab him with a kitchen knife and attempt an escape. Later on, when she's outlived her usefulness to her captors, she's stripped back down to her nightgown and marooned on an island, and that in no way hinders her ability to do what even the mythic Captain Jack Sparrow couldn't, and escape by setting the island on fire and flagging down a passing ship.
There'll be no living with her after this.
Finally, she joins the men on their mission to ambush the pirates, saves Jack's entire crew, and helps kill Barbossa, all while still wearing a dress somebody else made her wear. By the second and third movies, she's wearing full masculine pirate gear just like everybody else, and she looks awesome, but it doesn't indicate a change in her character. It's just a visual confirmation of who she's always been and proven herself to be. No matter what she's wearing, it's never going to make her less of a badass. Because of how this film language develops, it's no wonder that a dress that a character is wearing at the moment she overcomes her greatest obstacle becomes iconic. We see similar fan appreciation for things like Spider-Man's homemade suits or Thor's gladiator haircut. Whether or not they're the main character, whether or not they fight, run, manipulate, or charm, these women consistently make their strongest decisions during what could be their lowest point and reclaim these outfits the way that a minority reclaims a slur. In Labyrinth, the one with David Bowie and the Muppets, Sarah wears a relatively masculine outfit for most of the movie, a flowy shirt, jeans, and a vest. At one point, she gets lulled into a dream sequence where she's trapped with the Goblin King at a masquerade ball, and she finds herself wearing a frilly 80s ball gown instead. The scene only lasts about 3 minutes, and then she's back to her own outfit, but during that brief moment of being captured and controlled, she hears the cries of her younger brother, remembers her mission to save him, rejects the Goblin King, and escapes entirely on her own. And that's the outfit everyone remembers. In Game of Thrones, Brienne of Tarth is a 6-foot armored paladin who has shrugged off all expectations of traditional femininity to instead be the only morally upstanding knight in the entire world.
You fought bravely today, Lady Brienne.
Brienne's enough. I'm no lady.
She's constantly mocked for being neither feminine nor masculine enough. She stands out as a one-of-a-kind oddity, not just because of her physical appearance, but also because of her unwavering loyalty and dedication to her oaths. And everyone hates her for it. But that doesn't dissuade her because she's been dealing with it her entire life. In season 3, she and Jaime Lannister are captured by the Boltons, a family who can be accurately described in Game of Thrones universe as the bad ones. Jaime is let go because he's rich and male, but Brienne is treated like a joke and given an old maiden dress and a wooden sword before being thrown into a pit with a bear. But she stands her ground, fights back, and survives long enough to escape with Jaime's help. And she somehow looks awesome while doing it, probably because making her wear a rentable Ren Fair costume doesn't suddenly make her not shaped like a fucking Valkyrie. In Scott Pilgrim, Ramona Flowers is an extremely independent character who projects her individuality through her clothing, her accessories, her constantly changing hair color, and her judgmental posture. She knows exactly who she is and what she wants, and relies on nobody, arguably to a fault. Even as the love interest, she holds the power over the plot, and most of the men in her life are trying to win her favor, except for Gideon Graves, who installs a mind control chip or something on her neck.
No, I mean, he literally has a way of getting into my head.
That is evil.
She's been outrunning and avoiding him for the whole movie, but he catches and reclaims her at the end, yet again, putting her in a dress that he picked out. In the comics, it's way more complicated, but also a little clearer. Gideon loves controlling her and dressing her how he likes, and does the same thing to a bunch of other women. And in both iterations, Ramona is able to break free and help Scott beat him up during this scene. I've not seen the animated series yet. Please yell at me in the comments. Katniss Everdeen's story in The Hunger Games is essentially this one moment of resisting the identity being forced on her, stretched out over her entire life, which is like a little too real. Like all of the Hunger Games, instead of a single captor, she's regularly being used to push propaganda for multiple different factions. Whether she's appealing to the elites of the capital, the audience in the Hunger Games, or the revolutionaries who look up to her, somebody else is constantly deciding what she wears and how she is perceived. Katniss only gets a few moments where she truly gets to make her own choices, and otherwise has to ride out the waves of things happening to her, which makes those decisions feel monumentally important. She's put in fancy gowns, combat gear, superhero costumes, and despite the work everyone does to turn her into what they want her to be, the only time she really shines and makes an impact are when she acts on her own feelings and instincts. It's crazy how this trope has flown under the radar for so long, because I think it's representative of a pretty foundational female experience, one of being underestimated and forced to get back in line because you're doing too much. But equally foundational is the experience of persevering anyway, and that's why these stories stick with us. They turn the dress into something awesome on its own. tone, something that makes you feel powerful rather than putting you down as intended. The dream is that you don't have to be in a suit of armor or masculine clothing to be taken seriously. You could wear a sparkly gown and fight just as hard. And the postmodern next step of this trope is the idea that femininity could be the source of power unironically. Building on these themes has given us things like She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. I remember watching that show before any of these thoughts had even begun forming in my brain and being so impressed that it just flipped all the standards we've come to expect upside down. It had a primarily female main cast, a majority of the romantic relationships were gay, power was tied to feminine traits instead of masculine ones. The main character, who wears a military uniform by default, magically changes into a glittery skirt, a shiny golden tiara, and long flowing hair to indicate that she has become more powerful. And then they just tell a great adventure story without calling attention to any of it. It was the first time I understood what normalizing something really looked like. Still didn't make anything click though, that took a while. I love the idea that even She-Ra will one day be not that groundbreaking. I think the fact that K-pop Demon Hunters gained such a wide audience last year is a great indication of how much more common it's becoming for women to be the heroes of their own stories without having to conform to male standards or be forcibly reminded of the pushback they're fighting against. But sometimes it feels good to be reminded that even if someone tries to take away who you are, it ultimately doesn't work. Anyway, I was doing it for the bit, but I'm worried about the comments now that I've mentioned wearing a dress so much. Oh, hello. Welcome to the after credits. Thank you for watching the second video of the month. Thank you to the team. We got a bunch of new Patreon subscribers after mentioning the WB thing last time. Thank you so much to everybody who signed up. It's really making a big difference. And we have some blooper clips from some of these videos. We have a podcast that Allison and I are doing that I talked about earlier. It's only $5 a month, and you get access to a whole library of behind the scenes stuff and extra videos that we never uploaded before. We even have some stuff that we're re-editing now that never got made from back when we did D&D stuff, including a never before seen guest quest. If you're enjoying the videos, Patreon really is just such a big help. And you can also support us by tuning in on Twitch, where we do our morning show Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and do funny stuff. We do when we chat, we hang out. We have a Discord, by the way. Those are my plugs. Hope you're all doing good, and we'll see you next month with another couple videos.